When I graduated, they didn't care. When I built a $94 million empire, they texted family first. The message came in at 3:47 p.m. on a random Tuesday. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at my phone, letting the irony settle in. For 8 months there had been nothing. No calls. No check-ins. No accidental "how are you?" text sent at 1 a.m. 8 months of deliberate, calculated silence. Then 4 hours ago, a national business magazine published a feature estimating my hotel portfolio at $94 million. And suddenly I existed again. They didn't miss me. They recalculated me. I left the coffee shop without finishing my drink. The sun was warm against the pavement, but I felt that familiar internal chill, the kind that doesn't come from weather, only from blood relatives. I unlocked my Lucid Air, its quiet click echoing in the nearly empty lot. It was elegant, minimal, paid for by years of exhaustion and risk no one had clapped for. But sitting behind the wheel, I wasn't thinking about success. I was thinking about a stage. 8 months earlier, I had walked across an auditorium platform in a black graduation gown, earning my master's in hospitality management. My name rang out through the speakers. The lights were blinding. I scanned the crowd anyway, not for applause, just for someone who shared my last name. The chair reserved for my mother, Cynthia, empty. My father, Philip, empty. Vanessa, Mason, empty. I smiled when they handed me my diploma, but it felt fragile, like glass pressed into shape. One wrong breath and it would splinter. 2 hours before the ceremony, my mother had texted, "Migraine, sweetheart. Can't make the drive. We'll celebrate soon." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to think pain, not preference, had kept her away. But social media doesn't lie kindly. That night, alone in my studio apartment with cold takeout and a bottle of grocery store wine, I opened Instagram. Mason's story loaded instantly. Yacht life with the fam. Timestamp that afternoon. There was my father, cigar in hand, laughing. There was my mother, the migraine miracle, wearing a sun hat and sipping champagne, glowing. Vanessa, posing like the day belonged to her. They were celebrating Mason's birthday. His birthday was technically 3 days away, but apparently that was flexible. My graduation was not. I didn't cry. I audited. I measured the gap between what I had hoped for and what was real. Then I blocked them from my stories and went back to work. That was the day I stopped confusing DNA with loyalty. Now my phone lit up again in the passenger seat. Family meeting. Don't be late. Most people would see concern in that sentence. An attempt to reconnect. A father reaching out. I saw strategy. In families like mine, silence isn't absence. It's positioning. And attention isn't love. It's leverage. I call it the quietest form of violence. Normalized cruelty. My father didn't text because he missed me. He texted because in his mind the lesson had worked. He believed his silence was corrective. Strategic. A timeout issued to an ungrateful daughter who needed to learn her place. For 8 months he withheld approval the way other men withhold allowance. And now that a glossy business magazine had stamped a $94 million valuation across my name, the punishment was officially over. I had passed inspection. In his version of reality, he wasn't cruel. He was principled. Order had been restored. The underperforming asset had matured. He wasn't reaching out to reconcile. He was ready to collect. He expected gratitude. Expected me to sprint back across the threshold like a drenched dog thrilled that the door had finally cracked open. He assumed I would be thankful for re-entry. But that girl, the one who scanned auditoriums for familiar faces, was gone. I started the car. The engine came alive with that low, controlled hum, quiet power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. I wasn't driving to dinner for healing. I was driving to close a ledger. They wanted a family meeting. Fine. I would give them a final one. I headed south, leaving behind the city's glass towers and turning toward the coast. The scenery softened into vineyards and rolling hills. But this wasn't the polished wine country from postcards. This was its neglected fringe, the part brochures never photograph. The estate appeared at the end of a winding gravel drive, exactly where memory had left it and time had punished it. My great-grandfather built that house when the family name meant something. Now it stood like a monument to decay. The vines were feral, strangling their own trellises. The mansion, once the pride of the county, slouched under peeling paint and warped shutters. It looked exhausted, like a former king pretending not to notice the cracks in his crown. My Lucid Air rolled to a stop beside my father's aging luxury sedan. The contrast was almost indecent. Mine was immaculate, silent, efficient, engineered for the future. His leaked oil onto fractured pavement, clinging to relevance the way he clung to authority. New money versus nostalgia. Progress versus preservation. I picked up my leather portfolio. Inside were the papers that would end whatever illusion this dinner was supposed to resurrect. The air smelled damp, soil, mildew, and the faint bitterness of wealth mishandled. I didn't knock. The house exhaled dust and old perfume as I stepped inside. Heavy antique furniture crowded the rooms like artifacts in a forgotten museum. Everything was ornate. Everything was outdated. My mother, Cynthia, emerged from the drawing room wearing a silk gown I remembered from a gala 3 years ago. Perfectly styled hair. Perfectly rehearsed smile. She opened her arms wide, as though 8 months of silence had been nothing more than a scheduling error. "Look at you," she cooed, pulling me into a hug that felt less affectionate and more possessive. She leaned back just enough to assess me. Not admire, assess. Her eyes flicked over my blazer, my heels, the cut of the fabric, the subtle weight of it. She wasn't seeing her daughter. She was evaluating an acquisition. "We saw the article," she continued, her tone shifting into that smooth, condescending cadence I knew so well. 94 million. Not congratulations. Just confirmation. "That's lovely, sweetheart," my mother said lightly. "Truly impressive. For a first little venture." A first little venture. She was describing a portfolio of 5 luxury boutique hotels, properties I had negotiated, financed, renovated, and staffed myself, while her husband quietly suffocated under mounting debt. "It's not a project, Mother," I replied evenly. "It's a corporation." Her smile twitched, just a fracture, before sealing itself back into place. "Of course it is. Come along. Your father's waiting. We're all here." The word echoed like theater. I followed her into the dining room. The long mahogany table gleamed beneath the chandelier, set for 6 as if this were a holiday instead of an ambush. My father sat at the head, posture rigid, expression imperial, like a dethroned king refusing to acknowledge the revolt. His suit had once been impeccable. Now the elbows were thinning, the fabric tired. Vanessa sat to his left, scrolling on her phone with bored detachment. Mason looked bronzed and unbothered, radiating the glow of someone recently returned from a vacation I hadn't known existed. Uncle Jeremiah, our longtime financial advisor, the architect of so many brilliant failures, poured wine with exaggerated care. "There she is," my father said. He didn't stand. He pointed to the chair on his right. "Sit down, Briana. We have business." I remained standing at the far end of the table, my leather portfolio resting against my palm. They believed I had wandered back into their territory, softened by nostalgia. They thought the silence had weakened me. They had mistaken patience for vulnerability. "Hello, Philip," I said calmly. "Nice of you to finally make time." His jaw tightened. "Sit." A servant I didn't recognize entered with a platter of roasted chicken. It looked dry, overcooked. The vegetables were sparse. We were eating on china worth more than Mason's car. Yet the meal itself was unimpressive. A perfect metaphor. All presentation. No substance. I took the seat, but left the napkin folded in front of me untouched. I scanned the table slowly. My mother, curator of appearances. My sister, addicted to her reflection. My brother, permanently vacationing from responsibility. My uncle, a shark who'd lost his bite. And my father, captain of a leaking ship demanding loyalty from passengers he'd already failed. "So," Philip began, slicing into his chicken, "we saw the article. Congratulations, I suppose." He paused deliberately. "I always said real estate was a volatile choice for a young woman." "Hospitality," I corrected. "And the market appears to be quite comfortable with my decisions." He waved his hand dismissively. "Semantics. The point is you've done surprisingly well." "Surprisingly." He took a slow sip of wine, savoring what he believed was control. The family business, he continued, is experiencing a temporary liquidity issue. The golf course and spa expansion, you remember the plans, has encountered some regulatory delays. Red tape. Nothing substantial. Of course. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. We require a short-term infusion of capital to stabilize operations. There it was. And since you've had some luck with your little hotels, he said smoothly, we've decided to extend you an opportunity. An opportunity, I repeated. He smiled. A wolf rehearsing generosity. Yes. An opportunity to invest. To reestablish your place in the legacy. Legacy. He let the word linger like incense. We're prepared, he continued, to allow you to join as a junior partner. Buy-in would be $1.6 million. He said it as if he were offering me entry into royalty, as if I should be honored to pay for proximity to their collapse. The table fell into a thick, loaded silence. Mason's mouth curved into a smug half-smile. Vanessa finally glanced up from her phone. My mother looked radiant, as if my father had just placed a jeweled crown on my head instead of a bill. I studied Philip, the man who ignored my graduation, the man who weaponized silence, the man who pretended I didn't exist until I became profitable. And suddenly the illusion dissolved. He wasn't commanding. He wasn't patriarchal. He wasn't formidable. He was a solicitor in tailored wool. A beggar dressed as a king. He was offering me first-class passage on a sinking ship and expecting gratitude for the privilege. He leaned back in his chair, lazily rotating cheap wine and crystal, confident in a dominance that no longer existed. That's when I saw it clearly. Not arrogance. Delusion. A man standing on fractured concrete pretending it was marble. Power isn't about who sits at the head of the table. It's about leverage. And Philip had none. He was spending authority like expired currency, hoping no one would check the date. $1.6 million, I repeated slowly, letting the number sit between us. That's precise. It's what the expansion requires, he replied smoothly. Permits. Materials. To get construction moving again. Is it? I didn't reach for a checkbook. I reached for my portfolio. The leather was cool and steady under my fingers. Because according to public records, I continued, opening it carefully, construction isn't stalled over permits. It's stalled because you haven't paid your contractors in 6 months. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The silence went from anticipatory to brittle. Who told you that? Philip snapped, composure cracking at the edges. County filings, I said calmly, sliding a stack of papers across the polished wood. They landed with a deliberate thud. Mechanics' liens. 3 separate lawsuits from construction firms. And this. I tapped the document resting on top. A foreclosure notice on the estate. Cynthia inhaled sharply. You're $8 million in debt, Philip, I said evenly. You don't need capital for expansion. You need a bailout to keep the electricity on. That's not true. Cynthia cried, turning toward him. Tell her she's lying. Philip's face flushed a deep blotchy red. How dare you walk into my home, man? And Mason, I cut in, turning to my brother. He stiffened. Your trust fund. The one you love referencing on Instagram. Another document slid across the table. It's depleted. Dad leveraged it 3 years ago to cover operating losses. You've been vacationing on borrowed money. Mason's smirk evaporated. His eyes snapped to our father. Dad, is that real? Enough. Philip roared, slamming his fist onto the table. Silverware jumped. Glass trembled. This is family business. You don't parade it around like gossip. You made it my business the moment you asked for my money, I replied, voice steady and glacial. You invited me here under false pretenses. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a transfusion. You planned to drain my company to patch your failures. We gave you everything. Cynthia shrieked, pushing back her chair. This house. This lifestyle. You owe us. I owe you nothing. I stood, meeting her intensity but never raising my volume. I built my corporation while you dismissed it. I saved while you overspent. I invested while you indulged. I am the only person at this table who understands cash flow. My gaze locked onto Philip. So don't lecture me about debt. financial or otherwise. You ungrateful little, he began, rising from his chair to tower over me. He never finished. The doorbell rang. The sharp chime sliced through the room like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Heads turned toward the hallway. At this hour? Vanessa whispered. Expecting another investor? I asked softly. Or another creditor? Philip shot me a venomous look before storming toward the door. If this is someone else demanding money, he muttered under his breath. I watched him go. And for the first time that evening I allowed myself a small knowing smile. I knew exactly who stood on the other side of that door. And I knew the performance at the table had only been the opening act. Philip yanked the door open, irritation already loaded in his voice. Instead, a calm, polished tone drifted down the hallway. Good evening. My apologies for the interruption. I'm here for Miss Briana. A few seconds later, my father re-entered the dining room looking unsettled. Annoyed. Slightly off balance. Behind him walked Miguel. Impeccably dressed. Composed. Carrying a slim leather briefcase. He took in the scene, the half-eaten dinner, the flushed faces, the tension thick enough to slice, and didn't so much as blink. Miss Briana, he said with a courteous nod. Who is this? Philip demanded. And what is he doing in my house? Hello, Miguel, I said, checking my watch. Perfect timing. I turned back to the table. Confusion had already curdled into fear. They could feel something shifting beneath them. Philip. Cynthia. This is Miguel, I said evenly. He's my broker. Broker. Mason echoed, his voice thin. For the acquisition I finalized this afternoon. I looked at Miguel. The documents? Right here. He set his briefcase on the sideboard and opened it with quiet precision, withdrawing a thick blue-bound file. I walked over, took it, and faced my father. You mentioned the expansion stalled because of regulatory delays. I began. That wasn't entirely accurate. His expression tightened. It stalled because you couldn't secure water rights. You needed the adjacent property. The old marina. Philip went pale. That land isn't for sale, he said sharply. The owner despises me. He does, I agreed. But he doesn't despise money. I let the blue folder fall onto the table beside the foreclosure notice. I purchased it. No one moved. I own the marina. I own the shoreline. I own the access road. And I now control the only viable route for your expansion. Silence descended like a blade suspended midair. You bought it, Philip whispered, the authority draining from his voice. For us? Cynthia asked faintly. I laughed, short, sharp, humorless. For me. I met my father's stare. It's a prime location for a luxury boutique hotel. Waterfront suites. Private docks. Exclusive access. My next property. Cynthia sank back into her chair as if the bones had left her body. Vanessa stared at me, horror widening her eyes. Mason looked between us like a spectator at a car crash. But without that land, Philip's voice faltered. Without the expansion, the bank. They foreclose. I finished for him. The estate collapses. The vineyard goes. The house. The legacy. You can't do this, he roared, his face flushing a violent shade of red. I am your father. You will transfer those rights. You will help this family. I don't have to do anything. Miguel extended a pen. I signed the final page of the deed. The scratch of ink against paper sounded louder than his shouting. There, I said, handing the folder back to Miguel. It's official. I'll file this at 8 a.m. sharp, Miguel replied. He gave a polite nod to the room and exited, closing the door behind him with soft finality. And then it was just us again. But everything had inverted. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was the controlling interest. Why? Cynthia whispered, tears streaking her carefully applied makeup. Why would you do this to us? Because you taught me how, I said quietly. You taught me family is conditional. You taught me love is transactional. You taught me worth is measured in assets. I picked up my portfolio. So I acquired the most valuable asset available. I moved toward the door. I'm going to build something extraordinary on that marina. Profitable. Sustainable. Real. And every time you drive past it, wherever you end up, You'll know it could have been yours. I paused, meeting Philip's gaze one last time. All you had to do was show up. He shouted after me, threats, curses, commands stripped of power. I didn't slow down. I stepped into the cool night air, descended the cracked stone steps, and slid into my car. The engine came alive with its steady, controlled hum. As I drove down the long driveway, I glanced at the house in my rearview mirror. It looked smaller now, diminished. When I turned onto the main road toward the city lights in my future, I thought about justice. People imagine justice as a gavel striking wood or a cell door slamming shut. But sometimes justice is quieter. Sometimes it's reclamation. They squandered land, opportunity, and loyalty. I reclaimed the opportunity. I redirected the land. I reinvested the loyalty into myself. I wasn't destroying anything. I was planting. And this time the harvest would be mine.